Okay.
Hey guys, so this week we learned about psychoanalytic theory, and our first question is, what is your understanding of psychoanalytic theory? So there are two kind of umbrellas of two different parts of the theory, and the first one it describes on page 33 is the psychoanalytic mind has three layers. That's your unconscious, your preconscious, and your conscious. So your unconscious is when the impulses are outside of your awareness. So you're not aware that you're having these impulses. The preconscious is when they both reside, the unconscious and the conscious, but basically there is the watchman that sorts out what's unacceptable and puts those unacceptable thoughts or impulses back into your unconscious. And then of course your conscious is where your conscious thoughts reside, so you're aware of those thoughts. The main purpose of psychotherapy is to make the unconscious mind conscious. The second part of Freud's theory is on page 34. It's your id, your ego, and your superego. So your id is your pleasure principle, your seat of biological desire. That's where a lot of his theory was based on sexual desires and sexual impulses. So that's where that lies in your id, according to him. Your ego is what helps you make decisions, make adaptive decisions, safe behavior and choices, things like that. And then your superego develops when your Oedipus or Electra complex is resolved, which is back into your penis envy and your jealousy towards your one parent for wanting the attention of the other. So essentially what you're trying to do in this theory is reconcile your unconscious and your conscious mind. And this is based on Freud's theory, though, that your personality is largely formed by the time you're about 6 years old. And he kind of based everything in what your experience was as a child, as well as your unconscious mind. I found that it was pretty interesting when on page 6, Anna O talked about how she really created the talking cure of psychotherapy, which is where it became less of diagnostic and the therapist telling you what you were feeling or how your life or situation was going, and more of the client talking out their feelings and their experience. This next question was kind of tough for me. What are the positive benefits of using this theoretical approach? I think the benefits for someone who either had a lot of childhood trauma or has a lot of deep-seated memories from childhood that were very effective to their life, like an attachment disorder with their parents, I think this could be beneficial then, but it was pretty hard for me to really find any other benefits, and I'll kind of share why a little bit more in a minute. Somebody maybe with a fixation on the unresolved unconscious conflict, it says on page 34, may benefit from this type of psychotherapy. One example, again, would be a person who did experience childhood trauma, maybe abuse, neglect, maybe their parents weren't there for them at all. There was the example where I believe his name was Bowlby. His family sent him to boarding school and he didn't see his parents a lot, so he kind of had some attachment issues because he wasn't very close to them. So that was a tough one for me. The next one was a little bit easier. What might be some possible limitations to using this theory? There are several. One, it's dated. It's very dated. It's vague in a lot of ways. Freud's research wasn't necessarily done in the most ethical or true manner from what I read. It seems like he may have kind of planted some seeds for things that clients maybe didn't experience that they thought they did once he planted those seeds. And his experience was based in Vienna on a very sexual repressed area in a very small, concise group. It even suggests that people who are homophobic are deviant. That was in our text. Or people, and we know now that's not the case. People, especially now, gender roles and gender identity is a huge basis for counseling. And it was quite a sexist theory. So we also, have moved now into a more feminist theory as one way to provide counseling for someone who wants to. Another limitation, not everybody wants to take a trip back to their childhood and work through those things. Some people want to work on the here and now or an acute issue. They don't want to sit and talk about what happened when they were 4. They have moved past it or don't want to deal with it. So either way, sometimes they just don't see a correlation in the two. Psychotherapy takes a long time. It takes, around 2 years. So barriers, just very simple barriers. It's expensive. Health insurance panels, as we learned yesterday, don't always cover a psychoanalytic theory. So the counselor may not be able to provide that type of work for the client. It's a time commitment. It's a huge commitment for someone to be able to take that hour or so every week, get there, go through and do the hard work. So those are definitely some limitations to the psychoanalytic theory. And the last question is, what can a licensed clinical mental health counselor do to ensure cultural competence when using the psychoanalytic theory? One of the things that really stood out to me about that was that you need to broaden your scope, especially if you're focusing on childhood. You want to actually learn about that person's family dynamic growing up, any cultural differences they may have. I know I studied Spanish, and my professor was actually from Spain, and I didn't know that it's very common for families to live together with grandparents, aunts, uncles, and it's very common to live with your parents even to adulthood. So that could really change the entire dynamic of your therapy and your work. I think you want to find out what cultural groups that client fits into, and then try to see maybe if in childhood they identified in that group, or if it was later in life. Like for my children, my 12-year-old who's a child, she identifies as gay, so that's a group that she's in, but she's still in her younger years. My adolescent also is gay, and she identifies in that culture. So you need to find out what groups or these people are experiencing in their life. Another thing that you could do is work on attachment-informed psychotherapy, the relationship between a parent and a child and their interactions. That's where I talked about Bowlby earlier, with his parents sending him to boarding school and him kind of having some attachment issues. He did, though, in his work, focus on parent-child relationships. He didn't focus on the infant-child parental factors, which is more what Freud did. But he was a psychoanalyst, and I actually found this really interesting when I was thinking about multicultural. If you read in the appendix about Karen Horney, where she rejected penis envy, and she almost even challenged it, that there was a motherhood envy, that men could be jealous or feel not happy, upset, whatever, about the fact that they can't bear children, can't breastfeed. So I found that really interesting and really profound, that back in that day, she was able to step forward with some of a feminist theory. The last thing, I kind of hesitate to say this about what we can do to be culturally competent, is to use a more eclectic approach. You could kind of be based in a Freudian principle, but kind of pick and choose other theories to apply to a specific case. And I hesitate to say eclectic, because in our textbook it did say that's a more haphazard approach. So it might be more of an integrative approach that you would want to use. But I kind of was unsure really if it was integrative or eclectic. So I would love in the responses you guys to tell me what you think on that. And that's basically everything that I can think of. So I hope to hear some comments from you.